Welcome to my channel. Welcome to this video. You are in for a long video of me just sitting here and talking. No editing, no pictures, no flashy stuff. Just me yapping about liminal spaces, the uncanny valley, and the philosophy that comes with it. You are in for an incredibly philosophically deep video. This video is structured in a way that it doesn't throw the most complex theories and philosophical questions at you immediately. It begins with the basics. It begins by explaining what you already know about liminal spaces and expanding on that. About two-thirds of this video is scripted. The one-third that isn't scripted, it's just me talking about my notes, my theories. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, Introduction. When it isn't quite right. Do you know the feeling of when you're, for example, walking to a hotel? You stumble across a hotel hallway with no people. The rooms repeat exactly on both sides. The lights repeat and are all on, emitting the same light in the same way. It looks normal, but there are no signs of life, no windows, and you feel the sensation in your brain. It isn't fear, it isn't danger, it's just unsettling. Something is off about the hallway, but you just can't figure out what. Or when you look at an AI-made picture of a human, but the face is perfect. It's too perfect. You develop the same sensation. It's unsettling. It feels human but isn't quite right. You feel something unexplainable. What you experienced here are called two phenomenons, the commonly used phrases that are hard to comprehend, these being liminal spaces and the uncanny valley. What I'm about to tell you here is a very in-depth explanation of both, diving into many things such as why does it happen, what makes it so scary, examples in popular culture, and most importantly what even is a liminal space, and what is the uncanny valley. Welcome to the in-depth explanation of the feeling when something just isn't quite right. Chapter 2, Liminal Spaces. Subchapter 1, Short Intro. This feels familiar. A school hallway, a highway stretching past the horizon, a field in the middle of a forest. You do remember this place, but not like this. You stumble upon a place, maybe a photo, maybe a feeling that you know. You know for sure that you've seen the place. You've been to the locations of the photo, you felt that feeling, but when you really think about it, you have not. But your mind convinces you that you have. This is the very definition of liminality. Or, well, it isn't quite. Let me explain. Subchapter 2, Definition. The definition of the word liminal space is a transitional or transformative space or feeling. Or, put differently and a lot better, an emotional state or a physical location that is not quite one thing, but not quite the other either. So basically, liminal means something that's in between some two or more things. The word liminal itself is derived from the Latin word limen, which directly translates to the word threshold. And the meaning of the word threshold is, in its literal sense, a doorway. So technically taken, the word liminal means doorway. This doorway can be both physical and emotional, as in, for example, a physical hallway, or, as an emotional example, adolescence. Adolescence being the time of life where you transition from a boy or a girl to a man or a woman, or whatever else. This often associates directly to puberty, whereas a hallway, is a literal transition. There are two rooms. Then there is a hallway which connects them, acting as a transition. But this all seems so far away from the thing I told you about, which is the feeling of something not being quite right in the place, or a feeling even. Well, trust me, it will all make sense eventually. When you think of a liminal space, one of the most common things you think of is likely a room with something off about it. But how does it tie to a doorway? Well, a liminal space isn't really a location, but rather the feeling like you are in between two things. It may be literal, like you're in a hall, or adolescence, being in between childhood and adulthood. But now let's think of the most common, most popular liminal space ever, the backrooms. More on that later. Especially the first backrooms photo, the yellow wall, the bright fluorescent lights and the damp carpet. It does feel familiar, right? That's because it is familiar. The original photo is taken from a furniture store under renovation. You feel that something is off, and that's right. The photo is edited to have a yellow hue and look grainy to make it feel unfamiliar. Now think about this. You feel that the place is familiar. It is a store after all. But you also feel that it's not familiar. It's off. It doesn't quite feel either way. It feels both familiar and unfamiliar at once. You are in between those feelings. You are in the limen, the threshold, the doorway, the transition of those feelings. Liminal is in between two, familiar, often nostalgic and new, weird, unsettling even. In emotional liminality, this is easier to explain. There is a feeling or event in your life that's a transition, a change. Liminality, through the word threshold, can be taken as a metaphor in this case. A metaphor for the fact that the person experiencing emotional liminality is no longer who they were and is not yet who they will become. Good examples of this include adolescence, a breakup, and a career change. This may feel unsettling and scary because the human brain wants certainty and structure. This is called liminal anxiety, and it is the shortest way to define liminality in emotional things. It makes us anxious because we are in the middle of a change, no longer who we were and not yet who we will be. Subchapter 3, more on emotional. Now, this emotional side of liminality really intrigues me, perhaps even more than the physical liminal spaces. Why? Because while liminal spaces can be scary, what makes them scary is often not the way they look, but rather the way they make us feel. Now, I'll mention some examples of emotional liminal things you can experience, these being specifically adolescence, a breakup, and a career change. More examples include graduation, moving, and the infamous midlife crisis. Now, I only have personal experience on two of those being moving and adolescence, but I will try to explain all of these examples and why they make us feel liminal. Adolescence. The term basically means the time period from the start of puberty to the end of it, basically being the time when we grow from kids to adults. But why can this feel liminal? Because it's a transition, one of the largest, most transitional experiences there is. Now, there are two main reasons for its liminality. One, you are physically changing. There is puberty. You will look different after adolescence, but you don't know what you will look like. Just that you will look different. Second, your life is changing. You will go to high school, college, or whatever. You no longer have the freedom of a child because you have to study and you might maybe get a girlfriend or partner in general, but you don't have the responsibilities of an adult yet. This confuses our brain, making us feel liminality. We get anxious from this uncertainty that somehow feels so familiar. We are able to understand this, but we can't completely comprehend it in our brains, and we take it for granted. Now, if you want to learn more about liminality in adolescence, I suggest reading Sovietch's essay on the liminality of adolescence. It can be found on Google. It's a pretty lengthy PDF, but if this topic intrigues you, I suggest checking it out for sure. A breakup. Why is a breakup or divorce liminal? Because often when we lose the one we love, when we break up with our girl or boyfriend, or divorce our wife or husband, a person can feel emotional attachment in a weird way. The person may be stuck between still missing the person they lost and between moving on from them. This makes it liminal and also taking into consideration how liminality is something we want to get out of. This makes our brain confused because often, unless it was an unhealthy relationship, we would want to go back, but we would also want to move on. This evokes a sense of in between and feeling anxious on what we should do, what will happen. And just like in any liminal space, there are many things that your brain registers at once, that the brain recognizes but not in the way that presented here. This you are once again feeling something familiar, this being maybe sadness, anger, loneliness, depression, in an unfamiliar way, this being a breaking up. Career changes. This may be out of all examples here, besides perhaps moving, the most natural and simple sounding thing, yet this one is possibly one of the most complex examples I'm giving you. Life is considered to have three sections, or phases, or whatever you want to call them. These being the first sections, being studying, spending about 12 to 25 years of your life, learning and studying general knowledge, but also what we want to do as our career. Then there's a second section where we spend about 40 years working and dedicating ourselves to our job. And then finally the third section, where we finally get to enjoy life with perhaps our family, our friends, our hobbies. This being retirement. Let me put this into order here. Studying, working, retirement. Now, what does life structure have to do with liminality and career changes? Let's use an example story here. We got Emily. Emily has spent the first 20 years of her life first going to primary school for 6 years, then middle school for 3 years. Then she decides to go vocational school for another 3 years to study to become an electrician. Then she gets a side job from a small company for a year and likes the job. So she goes to university for 5 years to learn more about the job. Then she graduates and gets a job from a bigger company. But after working at the job for 2 years, she realizes that she hates the job. It doesn't pay enough, it is tiring, and she doesn't have time to be with her family and friends. So she decides to quit the job and change careers. But what next? She needs the job, but doesn't want to work it, and her profession is only in that field. Here is where the liminality comes in. Emily just decided to quit the job she has been studying for almost her whole life so far. She is in between two things, in the limen of her old career and going to study for a new one. This means she must spend another load of years, this time only 3 to 8, luckily, to learn a new career. Let's forget Emily now. The liminality, once again, is how big of a change this is. In the case of a career change, you are guaranteed to feel lost. You will feel liminal, you will be in between getting a new career and losing the old one. This is a very life changing event, definitely, and it's really difficult to explain precisely why it is liminal, but simply put, it's a significant transitional event that varies from what the brain expects, that being the three sections, so much that it can feel unfamiliar yet still quite familiar, because you've likely exchanged other events like this, but nothing that quite compares. Graduation. This one isn't that complex because we've established quite a lot of the basics in the previous entries, but graduation, when you finally complete that first section of life we talked about a while ago and move on to the second phase. But this can be liminal because you likely won't get a job immediately, but you should get one. There may be pressure to get one, and you will likely feel liminal in this in between of studying and working. This is getting simple now that you understand the base idea on emotional liminality and liminal anxiety. Now, moving. This may be, out of the examples given, the most unexpected one, but at the same time it's quite simple. Moving is a literal transition. You leave behind your new home and go to a new one, thus being liminal. But the new home actually also has physical liminal aspects, which we will talk about soonish. The infamous midlife crisis is liminal. Yeah, and this is going to be hard to explain, especially because I've got to wait approximately 30 years from today to experience it myself. So, when an individual comes to midlife, they often reassess their purpose and direction and possibly rethink what they didn't want to do in life. This is, in my opinion, the largest form of liminal anxiety there is. Now, you may somewhat understand what I mean by it being liminal, but what is midlife uncertainty and why is it so liminal? Midlife uncertainty, also known as the midlife crisis, is often defined as an emotional state that falls under the category of liminal anxiety. Many factors affect why it happens. For example, emptiness syndrome, which is the loneliness caused by your own kids moving out. At this point, people also often realize that they've lived for quite long and want to leave now. This may not always be a negative thing, though. This may awaken the person to what they actually want to do and make them enjoy themselves. But this causes big change, a transition. This makes it liminal and thus one of the most anxiety-inducing liminal spaces a human can experience. The liminality in midlife crisis comes from, once again, a big change in life. You might not even change, but you want to, and this causes liminality because you're no longer who you were, but you are not yet what you want to be, and you might never be that. Subchapter 4: Physical Liminal Spaces. Now we get to the part which might actually interest you more, this being the physical liminal spaces, the thing that you think about immediately when you think of a liminal space. Now this includes a lot of things. For example, the liminal space thing that I used to introduce in this video. The example something being familiar looking but a bit off. This is the liminal space aesthetic, popularized by the original Backrooms photo. Then there are real life liminal spaces, and well, there's really only those two, and this is where we get to the creepy part of liminal spaces, which will then tie into the uncanny valley eventually. While in emotional liminality we had one simple explanation for everything, being in between two things. Now there's more to look at. There's the creepiness factor too. Common locations or places often considered liminal are, for example, airports, hotels, gas stations, and some hallways. These all are normal, everyday locations, right? Let's get a deeper dive into this weird phenomenon that happens with these locations. Subchapter 5, Liminal Presence. Now, before we even start this subchapter, I'd like to clarify that the term liminal presence is of my own invention and in no way an official term. Now, let's get started. Do you ever feel like a place exists only when it's needed? Maybe not, but I'm here to explain this to you, and then we'll see if you have felt it. Now, let's take a hotel for example. A hotel, in my opinion, has all the aspects of liminality, so it's good for this example. Now, liminal presence is the feeling that a place only exists when it's needed. Let's put it this way. You go to a hotel on your trip to stay the night, and then keep going. Do you remember the hotel? Maybe for a few days, yeah, then you forget it. Because a hotel is really liminal. It's just a place where you stay for some time, but you aren't staying there completely, but you aren't just passing through either. Now, there are six main reasons why a hotel has such a liminal presence. Number one, it's not permanent in a way. Hotels are made for short-term living and not supposed to be stayed in for long. This even more enhances the main concept of liminality, which is a threshold. Number two, repetition. In a hotel, every room is nearly identical. The hotel carpets have the same pattern everywhere. Think about every hotel you've ever been. It's always the same thing. Small room with big metal frame bed, small bathroom with a shower in a plastic box thing, and a sink with some cosmetics or hygiene products. The hallways are these straight hallways with rooms on both sides as well as lights. They all connect to a big room with two elevators. The reception room has a long desk or desks with the receptionist, and in some direction there's a sign pointing to the hotel restaurant. This makes the place become forgettable as everything is the same, and this may even make the place a bit uncanny because it's so perfect. Number 3. Anonymity of the occupants. A hotel room is a room where countless people have stayed the night before you, and you are just one of many. There are no signs about the previous occupants, but you know they were there. This adds a sense of mystery and ambiguity. Number 4. The comfort is artificial. Hotels are basically always really comfortable, easy, and you don't have to put any effort into life in a hotel. But the comfort is really artificial and generic, always in the same way. The food tastes really, really good, but it's always the same food. The bed is always super soft and comfortable too. The room looks nice. This makes you feel good, but when you think of it for a moment, it may come up as a bit creepy and unsettling how designed for you everything is. And now it almost feels like they want you to stay there for a longer time. They probably do, because then they'll make more money, but that's out of topic. This gives the place a very liminal presence because it just feels like, as it technically is, that it's always perfect and ready for you. This causes the place to have a liminal presence because it feels like you were expected somehow to be there. This idea of always being there but only when needed inspired many levels of the old backrooms lore. Number 5. Time distortion. Well, it's not real time distortion, but technically in a hotel, because everything is so easy, you lose any personal routine and your life changes for this day to something that kind of feels like the hotel wants you to live this way. But it's a hotel, so really you just cause the feeling yourself and then get creeped out by it when you think of it later. This loss of routine and change of life causes you to feel like time works differently, enhancing the feeling of being in some kind of alternate dimension that's there only when you need it. And number 6. People come and go. While the upstairs of a hotel with rooms may have all this liminality and weird vibe, the downstairs reception room is also quite liminal. Think about it. People constantly come and go, emphasizing the fact that this place is temporary, as you know that all these people have been here for only a few nights, or will be. All these factors benefit the hotel's liminality. See, most of these have some in-between things. Even the hotel itself is an example of its liminality as you go to a hotel between trips. You spend the night in there when going from one destination to the other. Some might even say that the night itself is liminal due to it being in between 2 days, but in my and many others' opinion, a night is part of the day. Due to this, a hotel has all the three things that could make something liminal. It is a transitional space, as I already explained. It has a liminal presence because you don't think about hotels when you don't need them, and you don't really acknowledge them other times than when you are there. Then there's also the something being off thing that is from liminal space aesthetics, because a hotel is very repetitive and too clean and too perfect looking. Subchapter 6. Liminal spaces and nostalgia. Not all liminal spaces are unsettling rooms or anxious transitional locations and feelings. Sometimes they can just be dreamlike places which evoke nostalgia in a weird yet somehow natural way. One famous type of liminal space photos are abandoned, empty, or just dark indoor parks like jungle gyms, slides, and building block castles. You've probably been in a place like that. To be honest, did you really have a childhood if you hadn't been in a place like that? Now, if you see that kind of place when you are older and haven't been there for a long time, and even more so if the place is empty, you can't perfectly recall what the place should be like. You sense nostalgia because the place was part of your childhood. There's also that tiny bit of fear because the place is a bit off due to it being empty, so you are unable to feel the same sensation as you when you were there playing as a little child. There's nostalgia, yes, but it's twisted nostalgia. Now, this might not really be about nostalgia, but I'm going to put this into this subchapter anyways because I don't know where else I would put this. So, moving to a new home and its liminality I already briefly explained before, but now I'm going to dive deeper into the actual new home as a location. So, if you've ever moved, even temporarily, you know how the new home is all empty and weird. If it's an old home, the creaking of it may even increase this unsettling feeling. There is something familiar about this though. If you've ever gone on a trip and stayed in a temporary home even, you know there's this feeling of familiarity and some kind of nostalgia perhaps even if you have never moved before. Somehow I have my own example of this weird example. I have moved twice in my life. I was, I think, 3 years old when we first moved, so I don't remember much about it. The second time I was 12. On the second time, we went to check on the house a few times in the week before we moved, and it was always fun to mess around and play in the perfectly empty house. Now that I think about it later, the place was quite livable because, it was empty, even though it's a house. It should have had furniture in it. But now to the actual story. When we actually moved in there, I had one of the most liminal experiences ever, sleeping that first night in that house. I remember how I felt that night, like I've experienced this exact same thing before, but I had not, if you don't count when I was 3. And I can recall some brief memories from that time, but not perfectly. And I feel like that might have caused this liminal feeling that I have. And obviously the house was still in a weird liminal state because we hadn't moved all the stuff yet, and most of the stuff we had moved was still in a pile of cardboard boxes in the corner. The only stuff upstairs where my room is that we have moved were all the beds, my desk, and a few closets and a single shelf. But that shelf was in the very middle of my room, and if you think of this in your head, a small bedroom with a slanted roof. There's a bed in the corner, but it's detached from the wall. There is a desk in the other corner, but the desk has nothing on it except a simple desk lamp. There is an almost 2 meters tall shelf in the middle of the room that's empty as well. And there are two closets on the other side of the room that are normal, but they are also empty. This is a very little aesthetic if you think about it, because it is a room that feels normal, but it's a bit off. I even heard some weird creaking from the house that scared me, and on top of that, I had a sleep paralysis that night, with some weird tall entity standing in my doorway. I don't think a real life room, a real life experience can get any more backroomsy. So, as I told you earlier, not all people find liminal spaces scary or unsettling, but some people could instead find them nostalgic, often because of some cultural or personal significance of the place. Why? Because the liminal space photos and places often resemble ones from the 90s and 80s, and obviously some people are born then, so they obviously find them nostalgic. But what if you were not born in the 80s or 90s? Well, there are more reasons. Well, this might actually have something to do with a very famous real life glitch. Subchapter 7: Deja vu of liminality. Deja vu. It is a French term that means already seen. It refers to a feeling of already having lived through an event or feeling or been in a place, even though it is happening for the first time. Now, how does this have anything to do with liminal spaces and nostalgia? Well, the nostalgia of liminal spaces might actually be caused by spontaneous and continuous deja vu. See, not all liminal spaces evoke nostalgia, but those who do so for some people, not everybody. And as I told you, for some people it may just be natural nostalgia because of the photos or places aesthetic. But it gets a bit creepier because deja vu has some very deep theories, one of which is the main one I want to put my focus into here. So basically, one of the most famous explanations for deja vu is a theory of timelines overlapping. So this is really complicated, but I'll try to explain it as well as I'm capable of. So there's this theory that there are multiple timelines that stem from other timelines because we make decisions, and each one of those decisions splits the timeline into two. One where we decided option A, and one where we decided option B. In this other timeline, we can do completely different everything, and deja vu is theorized to happen when our consciousness gets replaced or overlaps with our consciousness from another timeline where we have already experienced that experience we are experiencing at the moment. Now, the nostalgia of liminality, for example, in the moving example I made, may be caused because even though we haven't had that happen to us in this timeline, we have had it happen in an alternate timeline. Now, I could make a whole other video essay about alternate timelines and real life glitches, but we'll have to see about that. Now, this idea is quite terrifying that we have experienced something in another timeline caused by our own choices, and then we experience something similar to that. We get constant deja vu, and we don't even realize it unless we really think about it. This may just be the most far-fetched theory in this video, but honestly, I stand by it. Because what other way do you have to explain why liminal spaces that you haven't even seen before feel nostalgic to you, even though they for sure should not? Now, there are many other theories to explain deja vu as well, and if you believe in any other theory, this theory nostalgia won't work in the slightest. But deja vu itself has something liminal to it too, sometimes. A simple example of deja vu is you step into a coffee shop, and suddenly you know exactly what's going to happen. The woman at the counter is going to order a big coffee but does not have enough money for it. The man outside is going to trip and fall, breaking his glasses. The girl in the corner table is going to ask the boy in the next table to go out with her, and the boy is going to choke on his food. Then this happens, and you don't even realize that you just predicted every little detail on what's going to happen. But how are you going to explain this phenomenon without some weird theories like the timeline theory? But this experience of prediction, deja vu, is actually quite liminal because you feel the sense of, I've felt this before, yet you have not. Liminality. You are in between two once again, in between having felt it and not having felt it. Crazy, I know. Subchapter 8, the liminal space aesthetic. Now, we already talked about this quite a bit when I explained the physical liminality of moving, but this aesthetic has so much more to it. The aesthetic we're talking about here is the internet popular aesthetic popularized by the backrooms. Now we get the second definition of liminal spaces. Liminal spaces are empty or abandoned places that appear eerie and often surreal. Now, my definition of this is a bit bad, so I stole a definition from an article on Pulse Journal on Science and Culture. This being, a pillar of liminal spaces is the absence of living things, particularly other people, with the implication that the viewer is alone. This lack of presence is liminal in a temporal way that occupy a space between use and disuse, past and present, transitioning from one identity to another. What does this mean? The key of the liminal spaces is the emptiness. One major thing in almost all liminal space photos is that there are no people, and thus the liminal space word is often broadly used to describe transitions. This aesthetic often involves transitional spaces like hallways, stairwells, hotels, gas stations, and whatever that is in between, often devoid of people and sometimes slightly distorted and changed to make it feel more disorientating. This imagery often conveys eeriness, nostalgia, surreal feelings, and unease. This unease with liminal space imagery and aesthetic is often associated with the second topic of this video, the uncanny valley. The term often talks about humanoids that aren't quite human but still look human, gives many people an unsettled feeling, and this same effect in the brain that we'll explore later is likely what causes the eeriness of the liminal space aesthetic. The familiar place with something that subtly deviates from normal, making it feel weird but still as usual. An English writer, Mark Fisher, has explained this feeling when a normal thing is viewed from a different context. For example, you'd expect a school hallway to be bustling full of students, teachers, and other staff. But when you take these people out of it, your brain can't comprehend it the same way that it does when there are people there. This has a term: failure of presence. It is considered one of the main things that make a liminal space aesthetic a liminal space aesthetic. Subchapter 9, the backrooms. The backrooms may just be the most popular liminal space aesthetic there is, and I'm going to tell you about it because it is quite interesting. The liminal space aesthetic gained a lot of popularity in 2019 when a creepypasta was posted on 4chan by an unknown author. The post had this image you've probably seen before, the original backrooms photo. A photo taken from an empty store, possibly edited to have a yellow tint. This photo was attached with a text saying, By no clipping out of bounds in real life, one may enter the back rooms. An empty wasteland of corridors with nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. And as mentioned before, this photo was taken from a furniture store that was under renovation. And this is obviously liminal because a renovation is a sort of a transition, but it also a really good liminal space aesthetic because it has that something is off, but I don't know what vibe, and I want to focus on more specific backrooms levels more. And I'm trying to explain minimal lore, but it is required to some extent. I need to tell some brief backstory. So basically, when the Backrooms post was made, a year later, a Reddit page called r/liminal spaces was created, and there people started making their custom versions of the Backrooms, which led to some people creating a wikidot where they collected these versions, calling them different levels of the Backrooms. The wikidot is still expanding to this day with easily over 1,000 levels already created. Now, I've got three levels I want to focus on because they are peak samples of liminality. These levels being level 37, Sublimity, level Fun Plus, and the level 9223372036854775807, the Escherian Stairwell. I'm going to explain each individual level quite thoroughly, starting with level 37. The 37th level of the Backrooms, Sublimity, a famous example of the pool room subcategory of the liminal space aesthetic, which I really like. The level is an infinite maze-ish building constructed of white and in some areas dark blue marble tiling. The level has many normal and not so normal swimming pools littered around the level. Their depth varies. The level also has random windows, and if looked through all you see is white, cloud-like mist and a bright light. The level has no entities. It also has some dark blue areas where the water is toxic, but for the most part it's a safe level. This level works so well as a good liminal space because it does look exactly like any swimming hall with a nice big pool. But it keeps going, and the lighting is really off, with light coming from seemingly nothing and darkness in spots that should be completely lit up. It's also empty and infinite. This level, at least for me, awakens two types of liminality. Firstly, it's really unsettling and gives me the creeps because it is so off and it activates a sort of survival instinct. Secondly, it evokes some sort of nostalgia. Why? Because it is a pool, and the swimming hall near my house, where I always go if I go swimming, is nothing like it. But I still have an unclear memory of when I was younger swimming in a round edged large swimming pool that was in a room with a round wall and everything made of white marble tile. Once again, this is hard to explain, but luckily we don't have to go into timeline theories here because I know for sure that this happened. I just can't recall when and where. But in its core, Sublimity is really liminal and especially well made backrooms level, and it totally deserves the spot of being one of the most popular backrooms level out there. I like it. Level Fun is amazing, but I like its sub-level Level Fun Plus more. This is a backrooms level that I got introduced to from the game Escape the Backrooms. I don't recommend it, it's one of the worst games I've ever played. The level is huge, but not infinite complex, with arcades, jungle gyms, party rooms, mini-golf, storage areas, huge hallways and dance floors. It is one of the most dangerous backrooms level as it is filled with entities known as partygoers, yellow huge monsters that want to kill you as their fun time. There are also party hosts, small green cakes with an eye in the middle and they command the partygoers. The level has a very incredibly liminal aesthetic. It is completely empty in most parts because the partygoers stay hidden most of the time and all the photos that were used for it originally were taken from the real world. This level gives me incredibly weird and wrong nostalgia. This may be because I've had lot of experiences of these kinds of parties when I was younger, without all the killing obviously, because my friends always hosted their birthdays in these kinds of places. But now when I take away the masses of people and the tasty snacks and the nice gifts, all that's left is the empty and unsettling massive area and the same repetitive birthday music. But this backrooms level also has that creepy and unsettling vibe to it, because like in Sublimity, the lighting is off. But here it is even more noticeable. All in all, easily one of my favorite backrooms level when it comes to aesthetics. Finally, the level many numbers, called the Escherian Stairwell or Infinite Staircase or whatever. The Name is a bit misleading because an escherian stairwell, also known as Penrose Steps, is simply the name of any staircase that loops back into itself. The classic Penrose Steps is one of the most well-known and famous impossible shapes, but this backroom level is not that, but rather a round stairwell that goes on infinitely. The level has nothing else but this grey and worn staircase with similar looking floors between the stairs, and the wall has large prison windows with bars that let in light, but you can't see through them because similarly to Sublimity you can only see white mist and a bright white light. This one isn't really nostalgic, but this is a perfect definition of liminality because a stairwell is a transitional space. It is, in my opinion, also very, very unsettling. Might even be the most unsettling liminal space there is. At least the most unsettling backrooms level. It's hard to explain, but I think it's because the level is so normal looking, but the more you explore, the more mistakes you find, the more things that are a bit off. Subchapter 10. Other examples. There are a lot of liminal space examples in popular culture, such as video games and movies, and two I'm gonna focus on are The Shining, a movie by Stanley Kubrick based on Stephen King's book of the same name. The other example is the popular walking simulator psychological horror game Exidate by the Japanese dev team Kotaka Creative, which actually had a movie made of it very recently. First, The Shining. The Shining book is one of, if not the best book I've ever read, and to clarify, I've not seen the movie, but I researched it for the script, so don't worry. Now, spoilers for the movie and the book as well, so I suggest checking it out first if you want to avoid spoilers. Shortly, the plot goes as follows. There's a family with an alcoholic and abusive father who is trying to quit drinking. The father gets a job for the winter from the Overlook Hotel that's in the mountains, so the family moves to live there for the whole winter. They know so much that they lose all connection to the outer world, except their child Danny has a psychic ability. But anyways, they have to live in the empty hotel and there are ghosts. Danny has visions and so does Jack, the father. Slowly he starts going insane and eventually starts drinking again and tries to kill his family. Now, if you've seen the movie, you probably know why it is so liminal. I checked some clips and pictures and I can tell that holy hell yes, it is liminal. There are empty hallways with a repetitive floor pattern, the orange and red hexagonal pattern that is stainless and perfect, and it is also illogical. Hallways connect where they shouldn't. For example, there's a scene where the hallway takes two right turns, and even though it should come back to the main hall, it keeps going. The movie also breaks the fourth wall a lot. The main antagonist, Jack Johnny Torrance, often looks straight at the camera for a brief moment, and these factors together, you probably realize why this is so liminal. Everything combined a scary plot, ghosts, creepy hallways, which are transitional, aka liminal spaces, unsettling stairs, and spooky music. This might sound like just classic horror tropes, but really it's not just that, it's made to be liminal. The movie is so old, yet somehow it managed to capture the liminal feeling so much better than any modern media. Why? Because it is a, unintended, shining example of slow burn horror. When the film isn't fast paced, with scares happening back and forth and blood splattering everywhere, it causes the viewer to focus on the small details that you normally would ignore. This slower pacing causes the viewer to also feel this creepy liminality for a long time, enhancing it. Also, it has the so-called basic liminal aesthetic, with it being an empty but normal place and also being a transitional space because it is a hotel. And there is also a lot of focus in the hallways and doors in the movie. Heck, it's perfect even when the book captures the same liminality quite well. Stephen King truly is the master of horror, and Kubrick made the perfect adaptation. The other example I have, Exidate. Exidate is a very simple game. You are in a Japanese metro station and have to walk the other way, but if you notice an anomaly in the hallway, you have to turn around. You need to recognize correctly if there is an anomaly or not 8 times in a row to get out. And if you guess incorrectly, your progress resets back to zero. Imagine this already. Well, just play the game if you can, it's only $4 on Steam. So the game, first of all, is a metro station, which already is liminal because it's a transitional space. Then there are literal anomalies, which literally means that something is off about it. These anomalies can be the likes of no smoking signs being everywhere, the bypasser having no face, texts being slightly different, red water, probably blood, and many crazy things like this, and this makes it perfect liminality. It is normally a transitional space which looks perfect, but there are small subtle things off about the place. Oh, and the area is also infinite, giving it that horror-esque feeling. And when I say that this game is scary, I don't mean the kind of scary that makes me jump out of my chair in fear, but rather the creepy kind of scary. The kind of scary that puts me on the edge of my seat, expecting something to happen, but nothing ever really happens. And this is all because of the liminal aesthetic of this level. It's near perfect, but there are those anomalies. Now, all these liminal space things are really interesting and all, but we need to move on to the other topic of this video. I mean, we don't want to be here forever, so let me introduce you to the other topic. Chapter 3, Uncanny Valley. Subchapter 1, What is it? The uncanny valley is a psychological concept first brought up by a Japanese robotics professor, Masahiro Mori, in 1970, in his book titled Bukini no Tami, which translates to Uncanny Valley. The concept is that there is a relation between an object's resemblance to human and the emotional reaction to it. And more precisely, the more the object resembles human, the better the reaction, but right before it actually is human, there is the valley, which invokes a reaction of eeriness and fear instead of a good feeling. Common examples of this are humanoid robots, 3D animated humans, especially ones that aren't the best of quality, and lifelike dolls and mannequins. The original hypothesis made by Mori states that as the appearance of a robot is made more and more human, the emotional reaction by a viewer becomes increasingly positive, until the robot is almost human, when the emotional reaction turns into a strong fear-like feeling. As the being actually becomes a human, the reaction immediately changes to positive again. And this difference in reaction between almost human and human is what is the uncanny valley. There is this graph depicting the uncanny valley that I think is quite important. The graph depicts two different lines. The higher the lines go, the more positive the reaction, and the lower, the more negative. The horizontal line depicts human likeness, with the far right end being human. The dotted line is moving objects, and the normal line is still objects. Both lines start at the left at the same level with an industrial robot. This level here is almost in the middle of the vertical line depicting affinity, which is the emotional reaction. This means that an industrial robot should invoke no especially positive feeling and may invoke a slight negative feeling. Now let's focus on the dotted line, moving objects first. Going halfway to the horizontal line, we have a humanoid robot, and it's about three-fourths of the way up to the vertical line. I don't really agree with this, because a humanoid robot can be really close to a human, and those definitely give me the creeps. But I guess that the creator of the graph meant one of those humanoid robots that have less human features, even though they are humanoid. Now, going forward the chart, we have a steep drop at about 70% human, and this is the uncanny valley. At the very bottom of the pit is a zombie. Seriously, a zombie. This got to be a joke. Zombies are scary, sure, but they are not unsettling. While this may mean a more realistic zombie, I guess, I still don't think the chart is that good. Moving a bit more forward, and we have a prosthetic hand. Okay, now this I do understand. Prosthetic hands, especially when they are realistic, are ridiculously unsettling for some reason. And then when we go a bit more forward, we get to the same level where the drop began with the Muduraku puppet. Now, this is logical, they're not very scary to me. I know people who think they are scary, but nonetheless, going a bit more forward to 100% human, we finally got, well, a human. Or as the graph says, a healthy person. Next up, still objects. Around the beginning of the horizontal. Wait, what? I got lost. Around the beginning of the horizontal normal line, there is nothing, and around the same point with the humanoid robot, there is a stuffed animal. In my opinion, this makes sense. It's still not in the valley that's invoking fear, but it doesn't give an overwhelmingly positive reaction either. The still item valley is not even close to deep, and at the bottom it is a corpse. Now, damn corpses are scary. Well, not really scary, but rather unsettling. Why? Because you see it is a human, but its eyes, its everything is perfectly still. Because it's dead. Now, this line also has the prosthetic hand in the same spot that we already explained it. Now, I think this graph is pretty bad. I think that most of the examples are really bad and unfitting because none of the things that really give off an unsettling feeling are even on the graph, or they are not in the valley. But now, why does this even happen in the first place? Subchapter 2. Why does it happen? Why does the uncanny valley even exist? Why do we feel unsettled by near human objects? There are many theories. Theory number 1, mortality salience. This theory states that the uncanny valley is something along the lines of a built-in fear of death. This theory works because, as stated earlier, one of the objects that causes this reaction is a corpse, and almost everyone fears death to some extent. Seeing something that looks almost human may make our brains subconsciously connect the thing to a corpse and cause fear of death. And when it comes to humanoids, especially robots, the explanation is as follows. A mechanism that looks looks to us like a human tricks our brains into subconscious fear that we may all just be soulless machines. These robots in any state of damage, mutilation, or disassembly may also reminisce of, well, dead people, and thus copies of people. Because most humanoid robots are made based on real people and thus are copies of people, they cause a doppelganger effect, which is the fear of being replaced in a job, in a society, or maybe in a relationship. And the stiff and jerky movements of robots may also cause fear of losing control of our own bodies. Theory number two, conflicting perceptual cues. This is a bit more complicated and not as scary of a theory. This theory states that the uncanny stimuli is a result of conflicting aspects of a perception of an object. Our brain is hardwired to recognize both when something is human and when something isn't human. When these two thoughts are both caused by the same source, our brain gets confused and activates a sort of fight or flight mode that causes this psychological discomfort, i.e., eeriness, very similar to cognitive dissonance that we'll talk about a bit later. There are many studies that support this theory. Some scientists ran an experiment where the subjects look at different faces, each one being from different areas of the uncanny valley. They found that the subjects took way more time looking at the faces that are deepest in the uncanny valley. This result suggests that it is a challenge for the brain to necessarily classify something as simply human or simply robot. However, while this perceptual confusion does align with the uncanny valley, it didn't directly cause the uncanny social and emotional reaction in the subject. This may mean that perceptual confusion isn't the direct cause of the uncanny valley, but rather a result of it. Another test was also run where the subjects were shown a video of a cartoon dog slowly morphing into a real dog. The subjects were notified to have the strongest negative effect in the midpoint of the video, suggesting that the uncanny valley reaction isn't looked just near humans but also near animals. Analysis from these and many other tests resulted in the hypothesis that the reaction isn't inherently caused by confusion, but rather the difficulty for the brain to classify an object into a specific category, thus the name of conflicting perceptual cues. Subchapter 3, Cognitive Dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a concept in psychology described as a mental phenomenon that causes confusion and conflict of thoughts towards something with no inherent reason. Things that often cause this phenomenon are among many people's actions, feelings, beliefs, ideas, values, and especially, and most importantly, for my own theory that I have, anything in the environment. Basically, what this means is that you see something, often something usual, and it causes confusion and mixed reactions for now obvious reasons. And let's stretch this out. Let's walk down the deeper corridor of this thought. Let's say you're standing in your kitchen, normal lighting, morning coffee. You've been here 100 times, and yet for some reason you glance at the microwave clock and your brain just pauses. Maybe it's a shade of green, the numbers are glowing, or the way the light bounces off the counter. It should be fine, but instead it's wrong. Slightly, unshakably. Not wrong in the way of a broken toaster is wrong, but wrong in the way that makes you want to leave the room. That's cognitive dissonance acting on your environmental familiarity. But why? Here's where I can connect this idea to the uncanny valley. You're seeing something with the shapes of human familiarity. Might not be a human thing, but something that's familiar to you as a human. But the soul that the object normally has, that thing that you recognize it off of, just isn't there. There's no exact reason for your discomfort, it just kinda is. And that is cognitive dissonance. Specifically, it's visual cognitive dissonance. Your eyes are picking up normal shapes, normal symmetry, but your brain rejects it. Here's where it gets a little scarier. The uncanny valley isn't just about faces, it's a landscape of mental dissonance, a whole valley, like in the name of the theory of almost rights. And that's just liminality to a point. Let's imagine walking down a street. Every house is white, every yard is trimmed perfectly, there's no dirt, the trees all sway the exact same way in the wind. You should feel peaceful, right? But instead you feel like you've stepped into a simulation. That's cognitive dissonance caused by artificial consistency. Too perfect equals not right. Also the main thing of the liminal space aesthetic. Our minds aren't hardwired for perfection because we develop and we evolve in chaos, in varying things, in decay. So when something is too perfect or too controlled, too organized, which even though that is what we strive for, our instincts are pushed back. They ring the alarm bells in our head. This is not what reality feels like. And another example, you're in a video game. The world is beautiful. It's 4K RTS textures, hyper realistic lighting. The characters blink, they breathe, they smile, they feel real. but their mouths don't quite sync with the words that the voice actors say, and suddenly, despite the near perfection of the game, the beauty of the art that is the game, the whole thing feels fake. And you just fell into the uncanny valley. It's not just because of the visual, it's because the illusion of perfection that the game made, it broke. Your expectations clash with what was delivered. That clash is dissonance. And now it gets even more interesting, because I propose this idea. The uncanny valley is not a visual chart, it's a cognitive phenomenon. It's not just space between robot and human, it's the entire zone where your brain says, wait, this doesn't match what I believe should happen. And once you realize that, you start to see liminality and uncanny valleys literally everywhere. Old dolls with scratched faces, fake blends that are just a bit too steep, empty hotel lobbies that play music for no one. That's also liminal space aesthetic. Maybe you see that in a video game. Phone calls where no one speaks but you hear breathing. That you may see in a horror movie. It's not always about fear. Sometimes it's fascination that drives you to seek these uncanny valleys and liminal spaces. Sometimes it's the chill up your spine for no logical reasons, but the trigger is still the same. It's environmental dissonance. Now we look back. Cognitive dissonance, in its rawest form, is an error signal in our head. It's our mind's way of saying, I'm processing this, but my conclusions are messed up. It happens when your expectations, formed by belief, memory, instinct, stuff that you learned, are in direct conflict with the information you're receiving. When we apply this to non-human stuff, like robots, AI voices, deepfake videos, we're no longer dealing with your classic psychology. We're in the realm of what I call modern dissonance. A world where your video call with an AI assistant feels natural until they say something that no real person would ever say, and you flinch because you didn't expect it. You didn't know it was an AI. And just as you realized it, we've connected this perfectly to our previous topic, liminal space aesthetic. In reality, these things are basically the exact same. Subchapter 4, Similarity with Liminality. That rhymes nicely. Let's begin with a word you already know thoroughly by now, liminality. As you know, liminality is the state of being in between, the transition, the threshold, neither here nor there. Now, what does this have to do with the uncanny valley? I explained it pretty well, but let's just look through it one more time. It has quite a bit to do with it, actually. Now, think about it. Liminality is in between. Uncanny valley is the in between of human and non human, and we expanded it to even things that are the environment, which liminality is. And Uncanny Valley just is liminality with a fancier title. And yes, this video is ending soon. The script part of the video is ending soon. When I was writing the script, I had no idea that I'd be going so philosophical here, so the video is not actually ending soon. But we are now connecting our two main topics. Well, there's a third, but that's what the script says. I wish I could have explored the Uncanny Valley more, but I just can't find enough good info of it any longer. I read some books, but they touch more on the philosophical stuff that we'll be talking about later. Now, liminal spaces and Uncanny Valley have four main things in common. Number one, both are emotional phenomena dealing with in between. Liminality is any in between feeling, so it's more of a broad term to explain anything, and Uncanny Valley is a very specific one about near humans, unless we expand it like we did before. No, so yeah, the connection is that both spark discomfort by putting our brains in space where they can't fully categorize what we're looking at or feeling. When something is too familiar but still somehow off, we feel uneasy because we rely on categories and logic to make sense of the world. Liminality can happen anywhere, a bus stop at midnight, a foggy beach with no one else around, or even a memory that doesn't feel real. The uncanny valley is more tightly focused. It happens when something looks human but doesn't act or feel human enough. Or, for your perspective as a human, anything doesn't act or feel enough like you think it would. But at the root, they're both unsettling because they put us into a cognitive and emotional sort of limbo. They don't give us clarity, they give us pause. That weird stuck in the middle feeling is where the fear comes from. Number two, both can be used as an aesthetic for a slightly off horror style. Common examples of both are the Backrooms as well as SCP-096, the Shy Guy. These aren't just random horror characters or places, they're intentionally built around a feeling of being somewhere or seeing something that's nearly normal but not quite. The Backrooms are just yellow walls and buzzing lights, but there's something terrifying about the endless mundane repetition. That's liminality. And SCP-096 looks humanoid, but its proportions are wrong and its behavior breaks social norms and physics in a way that feels threatening. That's the uncanny valley. Both are examples of horror that don't rely on gore or jump scares, it relies on unease, putting you in a space where you don't feel safe, but can't exactly say why. This slightly off vibe has become a whole style of internet horror, and it's all rooted in those same two emotional reactions, liminality and uncanniness. Number 3. Both are really vague and hard to comprehend. Not too much is known about the whole in between thing. Liminality isn't something you can measure or clearly define. It's a mood, a setting, a blurry category, and the uncanny valley isn't a rule, it's a theory based on human reaction. And not everyone agrees on how or why it works. That vagueness is part of why they're so hard to study and so easy to get lost in. You can't always explain why something feels liminal, you just feel it. Same with something uncanny, it might be the way a robot smiles or how a face in a video looks just slightly wrong. You could have two identical looking things, but one feels fine and the other gives you goosebumps. That unpredictability makes both concepts fascinating and also frustrating, especially when trying to make solid functioning theories. They live in the gaps of knowledge, in the mental static, and weirdly we're drawn to that lack of clarity. And lastly, number 4, both are scary things that we seek for some reason. Despite being creepy or emotionally uncomfortable, people are drawn to liminal spaces and uncanny imagery. There are whole communities dedicated to sharing liminal space photos or analyzing uncanny characters. We make games and stories and videos around those feelings not to run from them but to get closer to them. It's like we want to stare at the weird thing until we understand it, or at least feel it better. There's a strange comfort in discomfort sometimes. Maybe it's because those feelings are rare or because they tap into something deeper, something ancient in our instincts or thoughts. Or maybe it's just because the mystery itself is compelling. We chase horror not just to be scared, but to explore the emotions and ideas that we don't get to feel in everyday life. Liminality and the uncanny valley are both tools for that, and that's why we keep returning to them. Final chapter of the script: the incomprehensibility. Subchapter 1: the half life effect. There's one last piece of media I want to bring up before this script part of the video ends. I didn't mention it earlier because it's not always brought up in conversation around liminality or uncanny valley, but the more I think about it, the more obvious it becomes. I'm talking about Half-Life, the entire franchise, honestly, but especially the first game and parts of Half-Life 2. These games don't rely on horror tropes or jump scares. They don't scream, "You're supposed to be scared now." Instead, they suggest something is wrong, and that's way more powerful from the very beginning of Half Life. You're in a sterile scientific environment, but it feels off. You're on a tram, moving slowly through a place that's oddly quiet, where people wave at you like they're NPCs in a dream. Everything looks functional on the surface. But the atmosphere is so weirdly empty, so precisely it creates that subtle sense of being in the wrong place, like you're passing through something that's not fully real. And then there's the G-Man. He is not a monster, he doesn't chase you, he barely speaks. But every time you see him, your brain says, something's wrong. The way he talks with weird pauses and slowing down in unnatural places, the way he stares, the way his mouth moves like unnaturally slowly, or how he always seems a bit detached from reality just slightly, but enough to make you lean back in your chair. That's uncanny valley to the core. He looks like a person, he acts like a person, but he's not. And the game never explains it really. The lack of explanation only deepens the discomfort. Obviously, there are lore theories, but those are just lore theories. Nothing about J-Man is really canon. It makes you feel like you're wandering through a world that's not entirely finished rendering. I half remember dream of a research facility, a city with all its life trained out, its perfect storm of liminal spaces and uncanny presence. When Half-Life does better than most games, this it trusts you to feel something is wrong. Like it trusts you to feel something is wrong without actually saying it, without spelling it out to you. That's the beauty of these concepts. Liminality and uncanny valley aren't things that need loud music or flashing lights. They just need time, silence, a hallway that's too long. Or what Half-Life begins with the long tram section with really nothing happening, but a lot happening at the same time. A face that blinks too slowly. Half-Life gets that, and that's why it belongs in this conversation, even if nobody talks about it in this way. It deserves to be seen not just as a masterclass sci-fi shooter, but as a masterclass in unease. Subchapter 2, a summary of strangeness. So now that we're reaching the end of the script, let's take a breath and walk back through the path we just took. This whole script was about two slippery, difficult to pin down ideas, liminality and the uncanny valley. We started by asking what those even are, and while we gave them definitions, both are more felt than explained. Liminality is the transitional state, the moment of being in between, not fully one thing or the other. It can be physical, like a hallway or an abandoned building, or emotional, like the feeling you get in the middle of a life change. And the uncanny valley, that's when something looks just human enough to make your brain panic. It's the android that moves wrong, the mannequin that's just a bit too lifelike, the 3D model with lifeless eyes. We took a look at how these concepts show up in pop culture. We talked about the backrooms, which turns the idea of liminal space into what basically became an entire horror genre. We looked at The Shining, where the Overlook Hotel becomes a perfect creation of liminality and isolation. We took a look at Exit 8, a short horror game that captures unease through repetition and subtle wrongness. And now Half Life, a game where the world is falling apart not with chaos but with emptiness and perfection. All this works use these in between feelings to get under your skin, not by showing you something horrifying, but by refusing to show you anything at all, and making you think about that void. When we talk about how liminality and uncanny valley are cousins, or maybe siblings, one is the in between of space or feeling, the other is the in between of appearance of personhood. But at the core, they both deal with ambiguity, things that don't sit comfortably in a single category. A room that isn't home but also isn't unfamiliar, a face that isn't fake but also isn't alive. These things break your brain's neat systems of understanding the world, and when that happens, it triggers deep, quiet fear. Not because you're in danger, but because your map of reality no longer makes sense. Subchapter 3, Facing the Incomprehensible. And here's the thing, I don't think we're meant to understand these concepts fully. Not really. That's kind of what makes them work. Distance space beyond our logic. We can describe them, label them, and make lists like I've done here, but we can't capture them completely. That's the beauty of them. Liminality and uncanny valley mess with the edges of your mind. They challenge how you define presence, humanity, and reality itself, as we'll see soon. And when you push against those edges, you start realizing just how much of your life is built. Fuck's sake. My camera software is working. Okay, my camera software crashed. And when you push against those edges, you start realizing just how much of your life is built on assumptions, and when those assumptions get broken, even just a little, it all falls apart. The scariest thing about the liminal space isn't that something bad will happen, it's that nothing happens. You're just stuck waiting. You don't know where you are or how long you've been walking or if you've been here before. You could be dreaming, you could be dead, you could be just waking up. The same goes for the uncanny valley. It's not about a killer robot jumping out at you, it's about a robot that won't stop looking at you. One that talks like a person but not quite, that almost feels like it has a soul but it doesn't. You're not sure. That unsureness is where fear lives, not in violence, in uncertainty. And what do we do with all this? We chase it. That's the weirdest part. We make horror games about liminal offices and uncanny dummies. We make videos about people walking to empty malls forever. We stare at faces that creep us out on purpose. We seek it because deep down we're obsessed with the unknown. We don't just want comfort, we want to be shaken. Reminded that the world is bigger than what we can explain, that there's still something out there we don't understand. Liminality and Uncanny Valley don't give us answers, but they promise that there is something more, something just beyond what we can reach. Subchapter 4, Final Thoughts. And now we're here, the end of the script. If this video has so far felt a little strange, well, it's just gonna get more stranger, but that's kind of the point. I didn't want to make something that just defines terms and lists examples. I wanted to make something that felt like the things it was describing, a bit disjointed, a bit quite a bit in between, liminal even, and maybe a little uncanny, because that's what this whole topic is about. Feelings that don't fit into tidy, clean, neat boxes, emotions that don't end up period, but in a dot dot dot. So what's the takeaway? What that these things are weird. Yeah, but more than that, it's that our minds are weird too. That we're not just afraid of monsters, we're afraid of the invisible rules of life, the metaphysics breaking down. We fear things that remind us of ourselves, but are not. We fear empty places that look familiar but feel wrong, and we're fascinated by all of it. We've talked about faces, hallways, elevators, and the strange men in suits, but the deeper truth is that we've been talking about ourselves the whole time, about how fragile our perception is, maybe how thin the border is between comfort and fear, and maybe, just maybe, about how beautiful it is that we can even feel these things at all. That our brains are wired to notice the liminal, to flinch at the uncanny, that we live to in a world filled with thresholds, and sometimes the only way to move forward is to step into the space in between. But now let's get philosophical. So, now we're about to get philosophical. You might have came into this video to just see the definitions of liminality and uncanny valley, but I like philosophical stuff. I made this into an incredibly philosophical thing, so I'm going to walk through it. Feel free to click off the video now if this does not interest you, but I really suggest looking into this and actually thinking about this. And this part has no script; it just has my notes. What, 7 or 8 pages of notes. And I already recorded this once, but I lost the footage, so I'm doing it again, unfortunately. But yes, let's go. So I call this liminalism, just like any way of thinking in philosophy. It ends with ism. It's called liminalism here. And the core concept is that everything between zero and infinity, so nothing and everything, is in a liminal state. Zero and infinity, or everything and nothing, are pure states, and they are unchangeable states that can be reached and can change. And everything between that is a liminal entity. And those liminal things are changing uh, transitional states, changing in between. And that's everything. And it's something that the human consciousness can't fully comprehend. It can change. It is constantly changing. Everything in here is constantly changing. And it's sitting on a continuum between nothing and everything, which we'll talk a bit more later, soonish. But it those things on the continuum can sometimes be things created by human too. So things like the liminal space aesthetic. Now, in liminalism, there are 4 levels of consciousness. There are 3 levels of human consciousness and 1 level of God consciousness. And human consciousness or natural consciousness is starts with basic consciousness, and that's what most creatures, most living things have. It's the consciousness about themselves, but not about the world. Humans don't usually go into this category. It's more so animals, things like dogs and bears or bugs, birds. Then after that, there's human consciousness. And most people are on this level. It's the consciousness about themselves and their own actions. The ability to think philosophically about things, have morality, and know the consequences of your actions upon others, upon the world, and the consciousness about the world's existence, understanding that we live in a bigger system where humans may just be a small part of. Then after that, there's liminal consciousness, and some people have this level of consciousness. It's not necessarily it makes you smarter or better than other people who are considered at the level of human consciousness. In any way, is this better? It just is a different classification for those people who do understand liminalism theories about this, and more importantly, understand the unknown. Obviously, unknown is never fully understandable, but understand that there are things that we don't know about yet, and try to understand those things still. This is the core of this concept. And there is one more level of consciousness. Oh, and liminal consciousness people also understand the consequences of their actions. They properly understand those things, like what happens on the liminal continuum when I do these things. Not just what happens to other people, what happens to the world, but what happens in the grand scheme of things. Does it matter? Do you matter? And Then the last level of consciousness is cosmic consciousness, cosmic awareness, whatever. And people, normal creatures can't get on this level. This is where God is. And I do believe in God. I am a Christian, but I like thinking philosophically. Uh, my philosophical theory obviously includes God. And I put God in this state that is above everything. It's not on the liminal continuum, and it's the highest level of awareness you can reach in liminalism, and only God is up there. Now, yes, I already went through the core concept, but it is that everything in the entire universe is on the continuum, which looks like this. There's zero, and there's infinity. There's nothing, and there's everything. Everything in between that is in a state of change, a liminal state. And the main line here, that's our life. And everything is just moving around there because everything is liminal and liminal changes. And when something here changes, it changes the continuum. Here's the continuum. You do a choice. This thing happens. It changes the continuum, and the main continuum is just what would happen if nothing changes. If no one does anything. If literally nothing changes. If the world just froze completely and no changes would ever happen. And this can be sort of taken as the timeline theory that we use to explain deja vu, but this is deeper and not so timeless, but rather just sort of versions of universe with different actions. Like you, let's say, here's the main line where you just sit home. Then when you decide that one day, oh, I'm a bit tired, I'm gonna go to the store and buy an energy drink for 2.5 bucks. uh, this is what happened. And this is what would have happened if you didn't do that. You'd be 2.5 bucks richer. You'd be tired, and you would have never drank that energy drink. You would have just stayed home. Uh, and this continuum is our life, literally everything in it, and everything in it is liminal. It can change. It is not absolute. Nothing. That's why the continuum isn't just a straight line, but rather a mess of lines because it's not stationary. Some more about change. So existing is change, and staying still is an illusion. It doesn't exist because when you exist, when you exist already, that means that something has in past changed, and that being your parents meeting. And if suddenly everybody froze, nothing would change. Changes would number one have already happened, and also people would be thinking. Also, natural stuff would change. So change is existence is change. Change isn't necessarily existent, but existence is change, and uh, not changing, being still, isn't exists because the liminality is born when when because natural nothing can be nothing or everything. There's no such thing. And your own experiences are just changes in the liminal continuum, like with the energy drink example. And temporal and existential overlapping in liminal spaces can be great on the continuum. But what the fuck? Uh, so liminal spaces on the continuum can be in multiple places at once because you obviously do multiple changes once. You do this thing, you go to the store for an energy drink, and that changes many things in other people too. Obviously, you go to the energy drink, you meet people probably walking past you, and those people now have experienced another change too because they've seen you. The cashier who sold you the energy drink has also now made a change. So that's what we're talking about in the liminal consciousness. You understand that when you do a change, other changes happen, and this is constant liminality. And deja vu, prediction experiences, out of body experiences, false memory phenomenons, they are also sort of referring and proving that liminal consciousness might have sort of uh, what would it be a sort of interaction with multiple liminal spaces at once. Obviously, for example, in an out of body experience, you have your own experience. You may be dying, but you also have the other experience at once, which is you being out of your body and seeing stuff from third person. Uh, so yeah, the definitions and terms of liminality quickly. Liminality is a transitional state, not one thing or not quite the other, established many times in this video, and the types of it, the two basic types that you already understand. Physical liminality, which is transitional spaces, and the aesthetic. Emotional liminality, which is shifts and changes in life, and existential liminality, which is everything between nothing and everything, which is what this theory is about. And the central thought is that not everything between the pure states is in constant change, like I've already told you many times. And then there's liminal presence, which I already explained too, but it's a moment or a space where a functional entity feels to only exist when you need it or are observing it, like the hotel example earlier. And transitional space is everything. Every transitional space is a liminal space, but not every liminal space is a transitional space, and that's something you need to understand this theory. Because you might have a liminal space, for example, uh, let's say the aesthetic. The aesthetic is not obviously a transitional space because it's just a photo you're looking at. That's very obviously not a transitional space. It's a photo, and the point of liminalism is that every entity lives in these liminal spaces, these transitional spaces, and the only way to uh, sort of beat the continuum, get out of it, is to get outside of the continuum, which is to be God, to reach cosmic consciousness. And Half-Life Effect a bit expanded, which we talk about later, but I'm gonna expand on it a tiny bit. So it can be used as a principle in liminalism to describe the way the world functions in like the way the world works functionally. And the Half-Life Effect can be used to describe the situation where the world feels or looks technically functional. Well, it technically is functional, but it's not real. Or it has things that show you it's real. If Half Life was a perfect simulation, if it was just black base stuff without the obvious parts of it being a video game, that would not be Half Life Effect anymore, it would just be a simulation. So Half Life Effect is when you have something that would be a functional world, but it just isn't real. And it can be used as a functional tool to describe liminalism's stuff changing using a video game, and it can, yeah. Now let's get into some more mathematical stuff because I'm not really a math person, so don't expect this to be perfect. If there's some huge math nerd watching this video, please inform me how could I improve this part, because I've just really put the math here to have a way to think about this logically, even though yes, philosophy and math rarely mixed, but I wanted to do so just to prove that this theory might actually work and it's not just a philosophical way of thinking. So, zero and infinity. Everything and nothing are unreachable because, number one, zero or nothing. If you infinitely divide things, the result is never zero. You could divide one, you'd have half. You could divide half, you could have 0.25. You could divide that, you'd have 0.12.5. You divide that, you have 0.6.25. You divide that, you'd have what, point 3 point something. I don't know, it's complex. I would need a calculator for this, but the point is that you split things into two, it never stops existing. You split this into two again, it's still two. It's still two. You can split things infinitely, and it will always just be two more things, not stop existing. And everything, and also the thing that if you think about nothing, then there is something to think about, which means that it is nothing. If you can think about nothing, then it isn't nothing. It is something because you are thinking about it. And everything can be reached or infinity because you can't put a value to infinity. If infinity has a value, it's not infinity. Like some people say that the universe is infinite, but in reality, the universe has to have some part where it stops, because for it to be infinite, it would loop around infinitely, and that means that you can put a value on it, which means that it is not infinite. I think that's simple. And now more. So there are a few core rules in the math things because it wouldn't work otherwise. And everything on the liminal continuum is an entity, and numbers can be used to represent entities. Negative numbers don't exist because for an entity to be negative, it would have to be the opposite of existing, which is not existing, and it exists because you can think about it. If there's something that doesn't exist, it exists as your thought, which is an entity. And also because zero is an absolute pure state, and after that on the continuum there is nothing here. And the only way to subtract in math here is by division. Because if you would just subtract, you take something away from there, it would no longer exist. And it already exists because you think about it not existing. Then it exists as a thought again. And the it can be pretty simply put into math. Zero is a concept, the lowest like thing. Then there are numbers 1, 2, 3, 152, 16.78, 12,240, all the way up to infinity, which then can't be reached because there are infinite numbers. There is never a number that after that becomes infinite. Infinity is just all the numbers. The numbers are entities, and you might have the entity 10. You could divide it with 5. You'd have 2. Uh, you'd split the 10 into 5 pieces of 2. You'd still have a lot of entities, but the entity or the entities now would still exist. The entity changed, which proves that the thing in liminality that everything is changing, and but it never left the continuum. It never went fully away, and that's the main point. So you can go below zero, obviously, because you can't even reach zero in the first place. There are obviously there's not infinitely small and smaller numbers technically, but then there are because you can only divide, and you just get lower and lower decimals, and only the only entity that has reached cosmic consciousness and isn't affected by the rules of the continuum is God. And let's say you'd have the infinite 8, you could divide it again and again and again, it would never be zero. And okay. Now this is math that one of my friend kinda did for me because I'm not a math person again, even though this is simple. So we have a function x, which is x divided by 2, and that maps every entity until the smallest entity. That makes an infinite graph downwards. And then you'd have the function g, which is x times 3, and that maps every entity up until the highest entity, so infinitely upwards. And yeah, that's the bad stuff. The bad stuff is complex, it's a bit stupid, and honestly, I understand if you completely ignore it from this video because, as I said, it's stupid. But yeah, here are some explanations, proof for liminalism. So, liminal spaces. Physical or emotional spaces, they prove that liminal spaces, transitional spaces, do exist. The uncanny valley and theories about sort of paranormal thoughts and things existing proves that mainly the uncanny valley thing and human response to it, it proves that the human has a response to liminality, and it can prove that many things are liminal. And liminal presence proves that liminal stuff changes. It proves liminal change, and there is no way in our conceivable universe with the current set of science and belief to prove that liminal presence does not exist. We cannot prove that something like a hotel does not only exist when you don't need it, because there's constantly someone who needs it, obviously. And so there's no way to prove it, and that's hotel is just one example of liminal presence. You never can truly prove that something exists when not observed, and that's one of major things in philosophy. And then there's the half-life effect, which proves that a human can make a functioning model of the world, but they can't make a world because liminality is changing, and you can't create the pure states. You can just make stuff between those pure states, but even they won't change because it's just a video game that you coded on your PC. And then there's real life glitches like deja vu theory, which I already talked about earlier. Also, quantum physics, not really a real life glitch, but like the fact theory that stuff can change to break the main laws of physics. There's obviously also the what the fuck, the false memory phenomenon. You can have a memory of something that never happened. Why? Because it's a weird real life glitch. And now my notes are incredibly incomplete. The philosophical stuff may be changing. So you've just watched through over an hour of me yapping about liminal spaces, uncanny valley, and the philosophy behind those two. I hope you enjoyed this video, and the fact that this video is a bit hard to comprehend is unavoidable because of the stuff that we're talking about. They are uncomprehendable things. And now also I apologize for my voice being a bit off. It's because I am quite a little bit sick, and I just felt like I want to record this video now. Didn't want to delay it. So I really hope you have a good day, had fun watching this video, and I also hope that you actually think about the things, especially the philosophical things, because personally I think that the more you think about it, the more it starts making sense. And also take the philosophical stuff with a grain of salt, because I have not thoroughly finished it. There's still some inconsistencies, contradictions, whatever. Just they're, they're unavoidable at the moment, but at least my yaps about liminality and uncanny valley in practice are consistent and make sense. They are respect. Obviously, philosophy is just my own thoughts. So yeah, I hope you had good information with the facts and had fun thinking about the philosophical stuff. But yeah, without further ado, have a good one and thanks for watching.